I spent my entire adult life working multiple jobs to ensure my family never faced the humiliation of poverty again. Yet somehow that was not enough to earn an invitation to the very home I purchased. My name is Mallory. I am 34 years old, and I stood in the shadows of the driveway in Asheville while watching the warm glow of a celebration that I was never meant to witness. The sound of laughter drifted through the expensive cedar walls of the villa as I looked at a massive banner draped across the entrance that read, "Welcome to the home of our wonderful daughter." I felt a cold shiver of betrayal when I heard my father's voice booming through the open windows as he toasted to my older sister's supposed generosity in front of 50 wealthy guests. My heart hammered against my ribs while I held my phone in a trembling hand, realizing that they had spent weeks planning this grand event behind my back after I had quietly signed over the keys. I did not come here to cause a scene or to cry about my exclusion, but rather to show everyone exactly what happens when you try to build a life of lies on someone else's hard-earned fortune. Before we dive into the details of how I turned that celebratory music into a permanent silence for my family, please let me know what time it is and which city you are watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. If you believe that respect should be earned through truth rather than stolen through greed, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to support my journey. Your comments and perspectives mean the world to me, so please share your thoughts as the truth finally begins to unfold. Every scar on my hands and every ache in my back serves as a constant reminder of the years I spent being treated as a financial commodity rather than a beloved daughter. I clearly remember working double shifts at the local diner during my senior year of high school, while the grease stained my apron and the smell of fried onions clung to my skin until long past midnight. Every single dollar I earned was immediately confiscated by Glenda, my mother, who claimed that the family needed help with the heating bills, while she was secretly buying designer dresses for Cassidy. My older sister Cassidy spent her afternoons at the country club or getting her nails done because our parents believed her beauty was a far more valuable asset than my academic potential. I was the one who stayed up until 3 in the morning studying by the dim light of a flickering lamp after scrubbing the floors, because Dalton, my father, insisted that domestic chores were my primary contribution to the household. My best friend Riley was the only person who saw my exhaustion and would often sneak me protein bars or lend me her old textbooks so I could keep up with the advanced placement classes. Riley once looked at my blistered hands and whispered that I needed to run as far away as possible if I ever wanted to breathe, without permission from my manipulative parents. The injustice reached a breaking point when my parents took out a massive loan they could not afford to send Cassidy to an elite art school in New York, only for her to drop out after 6 months because she found the curriculum too demanding. Meanwhile, I was told that there was no money left for my education and that I should be grateful for the roof over my head while I prepared to spend my life in a dead-end job. I did not scream or throw a tantrum because I realized that my silence was my greatest weapon and that my intelligence was the only thing they could never steal from me. I spent the next year secretly applying for scholarships and working 3 jobs, eventually securing a full ride to a prestigious finance program in the city without telling a single soul in that toxic house. The day I moved out was the first time I felt the weight of their expectations lift off my shoulders, even though I knew they would eventually come crawling back when the money ran out. My parents did not even stand up from the television to say goodbye. They simply grunted and asked who was going to pay the water bill now that their primary source of income was leaving. I walked toward the bus station with 2 suitcases and a heart full of cold determination, promising myself that I would build a kingdom that none of them would ever be allowed to inhabit. Those early years taught me that blood does not make a family. It only provides a biological connection that people like Glenda and Dalton use as a leash to pull you back into their darkness. I chose to thrive in the shadows of Manhattan, burying myself in spreadsheets and market analysis, while Cassidy continued to drift through life on the dwindling remnants of our parents' retirement savings. Every bonus I earned and every promotion I secured was a brick in the wall I was building between my future and their parasitic demands. I was no longer the girl who scrubbed floors for a thankless family. I was becoming a woman who understood the true cost of every transaction in this world. My mother would call me once a month, not to ask about my health or my career, but to remind me that I owed them for the food I ate as a child. She would spend 20 minutes describing Cassidy's latest artistic inspirations while ignoring the fact that I was the one paying for Cassidy's phone bill and health insurance. I felt a deep, hollow ache every time I hung up the phone, realizing that my value was measured only by the digits in my bank account. Riley remained my only tether to reality, reminding me that I was more than a walking checkbook and that my success was my own. I worked through holidays and birthdays, climbing the corporate ladder with a ferocity that intimidated my peers, because I knew that failure was not an option for someone with no safety net. While Cassidy was attending gallery openings and pretending to be an intellectual, I was mastering the complexities of tax law and international finance. I became a ghost to my own family, a name on a monthly check that they accepted with greedy hands and cold hearts. 5 years ago, when the first foreclosure notice was pinned to the door of our childhood home, I decided to play the role of the secret savior one last time. I was sitting in my glass-walled office in New York when I received a frantic call from Dalton, who was sobbing about the bank taking everything they had worked for. He did not ask how my life was, or if I was happy. He simply demanded to know if I had enough money to save the only legacy he believed he had left. My career as a senior tax consultant had been incredibly lucrative, allowing me to accumulate a significant portfolio that made their mortgage debt look like pocket change. Instead of just paying the arrears, I decided to contact my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to arrange a complex buyout of the entire property through a private trust. I wanted to give them a final chance at a dignified retirement, so I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating the Asheville estate into a modern masterpiece with mountain views. I watched from afar as the construction crews installed floor-to-ceiling windows and a state-of-the-art kitchen, thinking this would be the bridge that finally reconnected us. During this time, Cassidy had married a man named Tyler, who was just as allergic to hard work as she was, and they were both living in the guest room of my parents' cramped apartment. I paid for everything from the high-end appliances to the professional landscaping while remaining a ghost in the legal documents to spare my father's fragile ego. My parents moved into the Asheville villa and immediately began acting as if they had won the lottery, rarely mentioning my name to the neighbors who complimented the transformation. Whenever I visited, Glenda would point out the expensive marble countertops and comment on how Cassidy had advised her on the aesthetic choices, as if my sister's taste was the real investment. I ignored the stings of exclusion because I believed that providing them with security would eventually earn me the affection I had been denied as a child. I even paid for the property taxes and the monthly maintenance fees, ensuring that my parents would never have to worry about a single bill for the rest of their lives. Cassidy and Tyler moved into the primary suite of the house, claiming they needed the space for their future children, while my old room was converted into a walk-in closet for her growing collection of shoes. I stayed in a hotel during my rare visits to North Carolina because my parents claimed the house was too cluttered with Cassidy's art projects to accommodate a guest. It was a bizarre reality where I was the landlord of a mansion, where I was treated like a distant and slightly inconvenient acquaintance. Dalton would often talk about the house as if it were a reward for his years of hard work, conveniently forgetting that he hadn't held a steady job in over a decade. I watched them from the periphery, seeing how they paraded their new lifestyle on social media, while I continued to work 60-hour weeks to sustain their illusions. My lawyer warned me that I was being too generous and that I should at least put my name on the deed, but I was blinded by a desperate need for maternal approval. I wanted to believe that they were just proud people who struggled with the idea of their youngest daughter being the breadwinner, so I kept the truth hidden. This silence turned out to be the greatest mistake of my life, as it provided the perfect vacuum for Cassidy's lies to expand and consume the narrative of our family. I watched as Cassidy posted photos of the sprawling backyard, captioning them with inspirational quotes about her financial journey and manifesting her dreams. Tyler would pose next to the outdoor fire pit with a cigar, pretending to be the master of an estate he had done nothing to earn. My mother would comment on these posts with heart emojis, praising her eldest daughter for being the pillar of the family, while I sat alone in my Manhattan apartment. I paid the invoices for the Italian marble and the custom cabinetry, feeling a strange mix of pride and growing resentment as the bills piled up. Riley told me that I was essentially paying for my own erasure, and I finally began to see the truth in her words as the invitations to family dinners stopped coming altogether. I realized that my parents had convinced themselves that I was just a wealthy stranger who owed them a debt, while Cassidy was the hero of their manufactured story. 3 months before the grand housewarming party, I noticed that my mother had stopped answering my calls entirely, her excuses becoming thinner and more insulting with each passing week. Glenda began ignoring my texts for days at a time, and when she did respond, her tone was clipped and defensive, as if my check-ins were a nuisance to her new social life. I discovered through a cousin's Instagram post that they were planning a massive gala, an event that was being marketed as a celebration of the family's triumphant return to high society. When I called my mother to ask about the date, she hesitated before telling me that the event was going to be very small and mostly for Cassidy's new social circle. She said that I would probably be bored since I did not know anyone, and that I should stay in New York to focus on my important career instead of making the long trip. I felt a hollow ache in my chest as I realized she was actively trying to keep me away from the property I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. My best friend Riley called me later that evening with a screenshot from Cassidy's private blog where my sister was bragging about her real estate empire. Erin, Cassidy had written an entire post about how she had used her secret investments to rescue our parents from poverty and buy them their dream home in Asheville. She even described Tyler as the visionary who had managed the renovation process, making it sound like they were the saviors of the family. I sat in my darkened apartment staring at the screen while the sheer audacity of their deception began to sink into my mind like a slow-acting poison. I contacted Mr. Henderson to see if any documents had been altered, and he confirmed that my parents had been asking about the process of transferring the title from the trust to Cassidy's name. They were attempting to bypass the trust's conditions by claiming that I was mentally unstable or that the funds had been a gift with no strings attached. It became clear that they were not just ungrateful, they were actively plotting to steal the house and hand it over to the sister who had never contributed a single cent to our survival. My parents had spent weeks coaching Cassidy on what to say to the neighbors and the local press, creating a fictional history where I was the black sheep who had abandoned them. I felt a cold, sharp clarity replace the hurt, realizing that the family I had been trying to buy back never existed in the first place. I instructed Mr. Henderson to prepare the original bank statements and the digital trail of every wire transfer I had made over the last 5 years. I also remembered that I had installed a high-tech smart home system during the renovation, which included a hidden intercom and high-fidelity speakers in every room for entertainment. I had the master access codes on my phone, a feature I had kept for maintenance purposes that would now serve a much more significant role in their downfall. I spent the next few days monitoring the house through the security cameras, watching Cassidy and Tyler walk through the halls as if they owned the world. I saw Glenda and Dalton nodding in agreement as Cassidy practiced her speech for the gala, laughing about how Mallory was too stupid to realize they were cutting her out. They spoke about me as if I were a ghost, a mere footnote in their glorious new chapter of wealth and status that I had funded. My mother even mentioned that once the title was transferred, they would not even have to pick up the phone when I called anymore, because their financial future would be secure. That was the moment I decided that I would not just stop the party, I would dismantle their entire world in front of everyone they were trying to impress. I watched them toast to their cleverness, unaware that I was watching every move and recording every word of their betrayal through the very system I paid to install. The rage I felt was not hot and impulsive. It was a cold, calculated fire that demanded a complete and total reckoning for every lie they had told. I spent the final week before the party coordinating with Mr. Henderson to ensure that every legal loophole was closed and that my ownership was undeniable. I booked a flight to North Carolina, my heart turning to ice, as I prepared to face the people who had spent their lives trying to erase me. Exactly 1 hour before the first guest arrived at the Asheville villa, I was sitting in a rental car down the street, watching the caterers set up the final displays of luxury. I had parked my car a block away and walked up the winding driveway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone, while the cool mountain air filled my lungs with a sense of impending justice. The house was illuminated like a palace, with strings of lights draped over the balconies and expensive cars lining the curb of the quiet neighborhood. I could see the silhouette of my father Dalton standing near the grand entrance in a tailored suit that I had purchased for him last Christmas. He was shaking hands with local businessmen and laughing at jokes, as if he were a man of immense substance and traditional values. I slipped through the side garden and entered the house through the kitchen door, which was left unlocked for the staff who were busy plating oysters and caviar. No one noticed me as I moved through the shadows of the hallway, eventually reaching the edge of the grand ballroom where the entire guest list had gathered. Cassidy was standing on a small platform next to a massive fireplace, wearing a white silk gown that made her look like a modern princess who had never known a day of struggle. Tyler stood beside her with a smug grin, his arm draped around her waist as he whispered things that made her giggle into her crystal champagne flute. I watched as Glenda approached the microphone, her face glowing with a pride that she had never once directed toward me during my entire childhood. She cleared her throat and began to speak about the hardships they had faced and how their eldest daughter had been their guardian angel in their time of need. We are here tonight to celebrate the return of our family legacy, a miracle that was made possible by the incredible success and generosity of our beloved Cassidy, my mother announced with a trembling voice. The room erupted in applause as people raised their glasses toward my sister, who took a modest bow as if she were a saint who had sacrificed everything for her parents. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I heard her start her speech, claiming that she had worked tirelessly in the shadows to secure this home for our parents' retirement. She looked out at the crowd and said that family was everything to her, and that she would do anything to protect the people she loved from the harshness of the world. Some people choose to chase corporate titles and forget their roots, but I chose to stay and build something that would last for generations, Cassidy added with a pointed look toward the empty space where I should have been. I knew she was referring to me, painting me as the selfish daughter who had vanished to New York, while she did the heavy lifting of maintaining the family. The guests began to murmur about how lucky the parents were to have such a devoted child, while I stood in the darkness with my thumb hovering over the play button on my phone. I could see the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, standing near the back of the room, with a briefcase waiting for my signal to proceed, with the legal intervention that would end their charade. I decided to wait until the very peak of their lies, letting them dig a hole so deep that no amount of social maneuvering could ever get them out of it. Cassidy started talking about the hundreds of sleepless nights she spent managing the finances for the renovation, a story that was a complete work of fiction. I took a deep breath and stepped out from the shadows, my black dress contrasting sharply with the white decor of the room and the fake smiles of my family. A few guests gasped as they noticed me, but my parents and sister were so caught up in their performance that they did not see me until I was standing right in front of the platform. Dalton's face turned from a flush of joy to a pale mask of terror the moment our eyes met across the crowded room, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. He tried to signal for the security guard to remove me, but I simply held up my phone and gave him a look that told him his reign of deception was over. Glenda's hand began to shake as she realized that the one person she had tried so hard to exclude was now the center of everyone's attention. I could feel the eyes of 50 influential strangers on me waiting for the explosion that was about to occur in the middle of their perfect evening. When Cassidy finally finished her speech and the room began to erupt in another round of applause, I pressed the command button on my phone and the music died instantly. The upbeat jazz was replaced by the cold mechanical voice of the smart home system, which I had programmed to read out the financial truth of the Asheville estate. New transaction notification: wire transfer of $850,000 from the account of Mallory Harrison to Asheville Title and Escrow. The voice announced with terrifying clarity. The entire ballroom went silent, the only sound being the clinking of a dropped crystal glass somewhere in the back of the room as Cassidy's mouth hung open in shock. I did not say a word. I simply scrolled through my phone and hit the next command, activating the second recording of a digital bank statement that echoed through the high-fidelity speakers. Monthly property tax payment of $4,000 recurring from the savings account of Mallory Harrison authorized for the property at 1542 Highland Road. The speaker continued. I walked slowly toward the platform while the guests turned to look at each other with expressions of utter confusion and growing suspicion about the hosts. Glenda rushed forward to grab the microphone, her voice shrill as she tried to tell everyone that there was a glitch in the sound system and that I was just a bitter guest. Mallory, what are you doing here? You're ruining your sister's big night with this childish prank. Turn that thing off right now. She screamed while her face turned a deep bruised shade of crimson. I ignored her and looked directly at the crowd, raising my voice so that everyone could hear me over my mother's frantic and desperate protests. My name is Mallory Harrison, and I am the person who actually paid for every single brick, every marble tile, and every drop of paint in this house. I declared with a calm that seemed to unnerve them more than anger. I reached into my bag and pulled out the original deed and the trust documents, holding them up so that the people in the front row could see the official legal stamps and my signature. Cassidy tried to step toward me, her eyes darting around the room as she looked for a way to escape the crushing weight of the truth that was being broadcast. You're lying. You've always been jealous of me, and you're just trying to steal my moment because you can't stand to see me succeed, my sister hissed, but her voice lacked the confidence it had just minutes ago. I looked at Tyler, who was trying to slip away toward the hallway, and I reminded him that the security cameras had recorded him and Cassidy talking about how to forge my signature on the title transfer. The room erupted into whispers as the guests began to realize that they had been lied to by the very people they were supposed to be celebrating. Dalton tried to play the role of the peacemaker, putting a hand on my shoulder and whispering that we should discuss this privately in the office for the sake of the family honor. I shook his hand off and looked at him with a coldness that made him flinch, realizing that he was just as complicit in the attempted theft as his favorite daughter was. There is no more family, Dalton. There is only a landlord and a group of squatters who have overstayed their welcome and their lies, I said, making sure the guests heard every word of my decree. I turned to Mr. Henderson, who stepped forward and handed a stack of legal papers to each member of my family, his expression as professional and cold as a funeral director. These are official notices of immediate eviction and a lawsuit for fraudulent misrepresentation of property ownership, the lawyer announced to the stunned audience. The guests began to leave in a hurry, realizing they were witnesses to a crime rather than a celebration, and within minutes, the grand ballroom was empty of everyone except my family and the scattered remnants of their shattered illusions. I stood there watching as the lights flickered, reflecting off the tears of anger in Cassidy's eyes, while my mother sank into one of the expensive velvet chairs I had paid for. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house, a silence that finally spoke the truth about who we were to each other. I felt no pity for them as they stood amidst the ruins of their ego, knowing that they would have done the same to me without a second thought. Only 24 hours after the disastrous housewarming party, the official eviction notices were served, and I stayed in the villa to ensure that every rule was followed to the letter. I remained in the house for the rest of the night, watching through the security monitors as Cassidy and Tyler frantically packed their expensive belongings into black trash bags while cursing my name. Glenda tried to corner me in the kitchen, crying about how they would have nowhere to go and how the neighbors would never look at them with respect again. She pleaded with me to think about the family honor and suggested that we could just tell people there was a massive misunderstanding about the trust's origins. I looked at her and realized that even now she was not sorry for what she did. She was only sorry that the lifestyle she had stolen was being taken back by the rightful owner. Dalton sat at the dining table with his head in his hands, finally realizing that he had traded his relationship with his only stable child for a few months of pretending to be a wealthy patriarch. I did not offer them a single dime for a hotel or a moving truck, because I knew they had plenty of jewelry and designer clothes they could sell to cover the costs of their relocation. Mr. Henderson oversaw the process of changing the locks and ensuring that every item removed from the house actually belonged to them and was not part of the renovation budget I had provided. Cassidy tried one last time to manipulate me, claiming that Tyler would leave her if they lost the house, and that she was pregnant with a child who deserved a stable environment. I knew it was just another lie, a desperate attempt to use guilt as a weapon against my resolve, so I simply pointed toward the door and told her that she had 10 minutes left before the sheriff arrived. Within a week, the Asheville villa was empty and listed for sale on every major real estate platform in the state of North Carolina, because I could no longer stand the smell of their betrayal in those rooms. I received dozens of calls from relatives I had not spoken to in years, all of them accusing me of being cold-hearted and asking how I could do this to my own flesh and blood. I blocked every single one of them, realizing that they were part of the same culture of entitlement that had enabled my parents and sister for so long. My parents and Cassidy eventually moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a dilapidated part of town where the paint was peeling and the hallways smelled of neglect. Tyler left my sister a month later after realizing there was no more money to be had, leaving her to face the reality of a minimum wage life alone. Cassidy had to take a job as a cleaning lady to pay for her car note, a poetic irony that I did not find joy in, but rather a sense of profound cosmic balance. I sold the house for a significant profit and moved back to a city where no one knew my name or the history of the house that had almost destroyed my soul. Now that I am sitting on the balcony of my new home in a city far away from the shadows of Asheville, I finally understand what it means to be truly free. My new life is built on a foundation of self-respect and the understanding that I am not responsible for the happiness of people who choose to build their joy on my suffering. I no longer feel the need to buy love or to prove my worth through financial sacrifices that are never appreciated by the recipients. The silence in my home is now a peaceful one, free from the constant noise of demands and the heavy atmosphere of hidden agendas. The lesson of this story is that filial piety should never be an excuse for others to exploit you and trample on your hard work. Money can buy a house, but it can never buy character or true love. If you do not protect your own value, even those closest to you will not hesitate to betray you for their own gain. Thank you for listening to every word of my journey. What do you think about what I did? Was I too harsh, or did I simply do what was necessary to survive? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to help me share more stories of justice and truth.